And we are live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans. I'm your on-air host, Sara DiVello, and I am so excited to welcome back for the third time S.A. Cosby, New York Times best-selling, multiple award-winning, New York Times Notable Book of the Year, LA Times Book Prize of the Year, winner of all the awards and all the things, Sean Cosby, here to give us the inside scoop on the re-release of his debut thriller, My Darkest Prayer. Sean, welcome back. Tell us about this book.
Well, thank you for having me. It's such a great honor to be here with you again, and it's a pleasure to speak with you. I really appreciate all your support. So it's great. But yeah, so My Darkest Prayer is my first crime novel, written back in the fall of 2018. It was published by an independent publisher called Intrigue Publishing, and those folks are great. They did an incredible job with it. And what happened was basically later on I got with Flatiron, and they've published my most recent books, and they really liked My Darkest Prayer, and they wanted to re-release it. They wanted to give it a larger platform, and that's no knock against the original publishers. They were great, but it's Flatiron, it's Macmillan. There's a lot more oomph behind it if you're working with them, and so they gave me the opportunity to re-edit it, which I think every writer would love to do. Have a chance to go back to your earlier work and sort of smooth down some of the rough parts and maybe correct some of the mistakes. Nothing's ever perfect, but the opportunity to revisit those characters in that book and that setting was amazing, and it made me realize that I think I'm a little too hard on myself, because that book is pretty good. It's a fun book. Basically, the story is, it's the story of a man named Nathan Waymaker from a small town in Southern Virginia. Shocker. Nathan is of biracial descent. His father was white, his mother was black. He's a former Marine, an ex-sheriff deputy who left the town's sheriff department when his parents were killed by a drunk driver, and because the drunk driver was rich, it appeared the police didn't want to pursue the case, and so he quit the sheriff's department, went to work for his cousin who owns a funeral home. And so during the day, he's a mortuary funeral home assistant, sort of a Guy Friday around the office, cleans the vehicles, picks up the bodies, does all the little things around there to keep the funeral home going. And in his spare time, he's sort of a troubleshooting, unlicensed private investigator for folks in town. And as the book opens, he is being hired by the parishioners of a local church to investigate the death of their minister, who it's rumored killed himself, but no one really seems to know. And as Nathan starts investigating the crime, he uncovers all this small town corruption and vice and sex and violence. And I think he's just the right person for the job. So
He is just the right person for the job. He is the guy who handles the bodies, the dead bodies and the living bodies as it is. Well, Sean, I can't wait to get into every single detail of this book because we got a lot to talk about. But first, I just want to welcome everyone because we are going live to 7 different destinations right now across Facebook and YouTube. So no matter where y'all watching from, you're in the right place. This is the right time. It is Mystery Monday. And because Mondays can be murder, we're going to make them a little less painful for you here with this incredible, incredible author. NPR calls Sean a miracle worker, and he is indeed. So let's get right into it. If you got any questions for Sean, get them going in the comments. Lynn, welcome to the conversation. She's saying, congratulations, Sean. Marcy saying, hi from Hull, Massachusetts. Sean, she met you at BoucherCon, and she loved your sessions. Thank you so much for joining us, Marcy. Shay with the hobbies. Hey, Shay. She said she is so excited to catch this chat live. Shay, always great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Sean, let's get into some of the amazing praise that this book has earned. So let's kick off with the LA Times. So they say, and I'm going to pop it up here so we can all take a peek at it. that your reissued debut thriller proves that you were a master from the start. Cosby has, in 3 books, emerged as one of the genre's best living practitioners. Its reissue is a brilliant idea. So, first of all, congratulations on those amazing words of praise. Now, you said a moment ago that you had the chance that every author wishes they had, which is to go back and edit that first book. So, LA Times is saying you were a master from the beginning. So when you were having that chance we all wish we had, what sort of things did you notice? How have you grown? What did you want to change?
I think one of the things I noticed was that when I wrote that book originally, I was very much in the mindset. It was a book that takes place in modern times, but it very much had a like 60s or 70s late crime novel sort of tone to it. And I think the biggest thing I noticed was that I wasn't as strong writing female characters as I am hopefully now. I think my female characters are just as strong as my male characters, have this as much agency. But I think in that book, I was still learning how to create those characters in a way that wasn't just aesthetically interesting. That the women in those books are all of a certain type that I honestly now look back at when I was doing the edits and I cringed a little bit because it's like, I wasn't giving them the full width and breadth of the characterizations that I was giving the male characters. And so when I redid the edits, I was able to really sort of buffet that and fix it and sort of create a different tone within the book than the original when that came out. I think also um, anybody that reads my books knows that I'm obsessed with metaphors and similes. And so having the chance to re-edit it allowed me to go back and maybe cut down a little on the metaphors, cut back a little bit on the similes, and sort of give the narrative more room to breathe. I think one of the things is, as a new writer, I was so afraid that I wouldn't be able to hold a reader's interest for 275, 300 pages. And so a lot of times what I used to do was I would jam it full of very irreverent, very flippant similes and metaphors, trying to hold your interest instead of letting the narrative do that. And so I was able to sort of, right that ship a little bit. That being said, I still like the story. I love the characters. I love Nathan. I love Skunk. I love that Nathan has this whole sort of background or backup characters that are a part of his inner circle. So it's Walt and it's Skunk and it's his friend Raheem and it's all these different people, these different characters that create sort of this really engaging cast. Like it's a really hard boiled book. It's a violent book, it's action driven, but I think it's a lot of heart. There's a lot of heart between Nate and Walt and Nate and Skunk, and their relationship and their bond. And so I think being able to clean it up a lot was really gratifying.
Oh, Sean, that's amazing. I know I would love that chance, and so many of us would. And I love hearing how you have evolved your craft and your perspective on your female characters, on the metaphors and similes, because I know, I'm a Cosby fan, and also I'm a metaphor fan. I love metaphors and simile. They are just candy to me. And so I love that. So I'm interested to hear that you actually chose to cut that back in this. That's really very cool. And as you felt that let the narrative shine more. Fascinating stuff. Carrie, welcome to the conversation. Carrie is a fabulous, one of my favorite book reviewers on Instagram. She is Carrie Reads Them All. She's also a teacher down in Mississippi. Carrie, thanks for joining us. She says, Sean, kudos to you for creating strong female characters. I'm a huge fan of all of your work. Carrie,
Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that so much.
Carrie, so great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Julie, welcome to the conversation. She said, Sean, thank you for joining us. I haven't read this book yet, but I was touched and really moved by Razorblade Tears. Julie, welcome to the conversation. I was also very, very touched by Razorblade Tears. Were you happy with your portrayal of the women in Razorblade?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think Razorblade and Blacktop both the female characters there were way better than the original of Darkest Prayer. I will say now though that the characters in Darkest Prayer now that I had the chance to go back and work on it are, I wouldn't say as strong as the ones in Blacktop and Razorblade, but they're, I think, way better than they originally were. And that's just me not understanding the full, I think, multiplicity of characterizations in a novel. Darkest Prayer was my first full length like crime novel. I had written a couple like fantasy novels and some other self-published
Oh,
stuff, but this was the first time I wrote like a crime novel. And so I was trying really to emulate some of the writers that I grew up reading who don't themselves, I think, didn't really create great, strong female characters. I grew up reading, you know, Mickey Spillane and Raymond Chandler for all his incredible skill. You know,
yeah.
they created the cliche of the gun mall of the femme fatale, and
Yeah.
I think in a modern sensibility, I don't know if there's such a thing as a femme fatale anymore. I think
There should be.
I think men and women are I was just
We
gonna
need
say,
to bring back.
I think men and women are equally enticing each other. So
That's what I hear. That's what I hear. But I, for one, am a fan of the femme fatale character. Very cool to know that you grew up reading Mickey Spillane and Raymond Chandler. Thank you for sharing that with us. Y'all, the book is out now, and you're going to want to get your hands on it. Here is the link to order from our favorite woman-owned bookstore, Murdered by the Book in Houston. So wherever you're watching from, grab that link, click and order, and get your hands on this re-release, because let me tell you, it is tasty. So grab it while you can. Carrie says, Razorblade Tears left me speechless. It was one of those books that you just need time to digest when you finish. The juxtaposition of violence and hope was so well done. Ooh, I like that, Sean. That is the, I like how she honed in on that as a nucleus of your work. Would you agree with that?
yeah, I think that's a thread that runs through all my books. I think,
Yeah.
you know, violence, especially in crime novels, is almost always an expression of pain. And so you juxtapose that with the idea that the characters are doing these terrible things because they have hope. They hope that their actions will change their lives, will change the lives of people they care about. Whether it's Blacktop Wasteland with Bug and the way he approaches violence as a means to an end to protect his family, his wife, his son, his daughter, or in Razorblade Tears with Buddy and Ike, Buddy Lee and Ike, that the way they use violence in a way to redeem themselves, that they're trying to find a better place for themselves. You know, and I think for Nathan, Nathan is very aware that he is a broken person. He's very aware that his temper and the things that he have gone through in his life have made him a person that's not doesn't really have it all together. And so the violence that he uses is again this violence of hope that he wants a better life for himself. He wants to get himself together. You know, he wants to get over his guilt and his grief at the loss of his parents. And but at the same time, he is also someone who is very comfortable with himself as well. Like he's aware that he has problems, but he doesn't let that get in the way of a good time. So
But that's what's so relatable, right? Because we're all broken. We all have wounds. We all have those old wounds, those old hurts, and those demons that we're fighting in whatever form that may take. And it's that inner fight that you hone in on, whether it is Nathan, whether it is Buddy, whether it is Ike, whether it's Bug. It's getting down to the humanity of our inner fights. And that is one of the many things that I love about your books. Shay saying, the way I'm like, can I sneak in an essay Cosby book to finish out my reading goals for 2022? Shay, yes, you can. Yes, you can, ma'am. And yes, you want to. Marcy saying she gets an Elmore Leonard vibe from your books. She just loves them.
oh
Marcy.
wow, thank you. That's high praise. I don't even know what to say to that. So
Shay has a question for you, Sean. She'd like to know, do you have favorite fiction book or books that you think is an excellent example of craft? If so, which ones? Ooh, I want to know too.
Yeah. I always recommend new writers read 3 different books. So I think Devil in a Blue Dress by Walter Mosley is probably one of the finest PI novels ever written. But it's also an incredibly well-written book, just regardless of genre. I mean, I'm not telling you anything anybody doesn't know about Walter. But also, the young lady mentioned Elmore Leonard. I think if you read early Elmore Leonard, especially books like Swag and Stick and 52 Pickup, you can see a true master of dialogue at work. There's not a wasted word in those books at all. And for me, the last book that I find, I read it every year around Halloween, is Darkness Take My Hand by Dennis Lehane. I think what Lehane did was he built on what Mosley had done with the PI genre, but then included this sort of very subtle existential thread through his books. Patrick Kinsey and Angie Gennaro are the man and woman private eye team. They're on again, off again, and there's something very philosophical about those books. And Darkness Take My Hand is probably the most philosophical of the series. And it talks about mortality. It talks about memory. It talks about pain. It talks about the idea of, your childhood and how we carry these millstones around our neck. And, I just think those are my top 3 crime writers. And those are the books that I always try to recommend to folks.
Ooh, thank you so much for the great questions, Shay, and thank you for the fabulous answers, Sean. I was very fortunate to be able to host Mr. Mosley this past spring, and it was a masterclass in writing. He is, I mean, just so brilliant and so amazing. And actually, he has some very kind words for you, sir. So let's pop that up. He says that you,
Oh,
S.A.
gosh.
Cosby, you, Sean Cosby, have reinvented the American crime novel. So let's talk about that, Mr. Mosley, talking about you. So, Sean, how do you think? I mean, I love that. What do you have to say to that? Did you set out to try to reinvent the American crime novel? What is your goal? Are you want to bring that humanity forward? Talk about the juxtaposition of pain and hope. Tell us.
First of all, I've heard that Walter said that before, and it always blows me away because I think if anybody reinvented the American crime novel, it was Walter Mosley. Because Walter was the first person that I saw that wrote books about people who look like me. There's this idea, you hear this in publishing all the time that something has to be relatable. We have to have something that's going to sell, and people have to relate to it. And it's always interesting that for a long time, publishers wanted everyone to relate to a straight white male, and they weren't interested in having anyone else relate to anybody else that didn't fit that mold. And Walter broke that mold and said, no, I'm going to write the story about people who look like me. I'm going to make you be a part of this world. I'm going to make you relate to this. And so if anything, I stand on the shoulders of giants when he says something like that. For me, the thing that I set out to do in my writing every time is I want to take the traditional cliches and notes of a crime novel, and I want to meld them with a deep emotional resonance. I think, like, I grew up, I love the Donald Westlake Parker novels when he was writing under the George Stark. I mean, not George, Richard Stark pseudonym. And I love those novels for their brutality, but because of their realness. And what I wanted to do was take that sort of sensibility, but then meld it with sort of a deep emotion, a deep understanding of what goes on inside those types of characters' mind when they're not robbing or planning a heist or chasing down a murderer? What goes on when they're at home? What goes on when they're with their friends, their family? For me, that makes the novel more resonant with folks. I think, there's a great Western movie called 310 to Yuma. It's a remake with Russell Crowe and Christian Bale. And there's a scene in that movie. Russell Crowe plays an outlaw named Ben Wade, a sociopath, a crazy person, also a brilliant character. And he gets captured, and one of the captors starts really talking about Ben Wade and his mom and all this stuff, really running her down really bad. And at some point, Ben Wade jumps off his horse. He grabs that captor, and as he's about to throw him off a cliff, he whispers in his ear. He says, "You know what? Even bad men love their mamas," and he pushes him off the cliff. And I think for me, when I write crime novels, I want people to read these characters and see these bad men and women. But even these bad men and women love their mamas. They love their daddies. They love their children. They're loyal to their friends. And so that sort of dichotomy is fascinating to me. I'm not the first one to do it at all. But I think I might be the first one to do it within the confines of a rural setting using African American lead characters. Because a lot of times in fiction, African American characters aren't allowed to have a panoply of emotions. They're usually relegated to being just one thing. They're one of one, instead of being able to be, heroes and villains, to be anti-heroes, to be all the things that like we all are. And so if people take that from my writing, if Walter says it, and I guess I gotta agree. So
I think it's a good rule of thumb. If Walter says it, it's always best to agree with Mr. Mosley.
yeah.
But thank you for Nikki saying no lies are detected. Absolutely. Yeah. Because I'd like to hear about that idea, especially tying it to a Western movie. It's so funny. I mean, it's unexpected, right? That moment of throwing the guy off the cliff, but saying even bad guys love their mamas. And yeah, and I want to get over to the other writer that you mentioned, which was that you mentioned as a recommended top 3 books to read, which was Dennis Lehane, who I believe was last spotted handing you an award on the BoucherCon stage. Just you and Dennis, your best friend, hanging out. And he also had some rave reviews here. He says, S.A. Cosby is a welcome, refreshing new voice in crime literature. So again, just showing that what you're doing resonates, that showing the I think I loved how you said the multiplicity of characters and showing this, everyone's saying Southern Gothic with Black lead characters is resonating with so many readers and so many writers, and we're here for it. We are here for it. Y'all, the book is out. It's been out for 6 days. You're going to get your hands on this. So here is the link one more time. I have time for probably 2 or 3 more questions. So get those questions going in the comments, and then click, and order. Get your hands on this book because y'all are going to love it, just like you loved Sean's other books. While you're typing, I want to get to a few more questions. So Sean, one thing really stood out to me is Nathan, I handle the bodies. So did you go, let's talk about that line. Did you go into a mortuary? Did you look at bodies? Or did you just use your imagination? I want to know about the bodies.
So I used to work at a mortuary. I worked at a mortuary for a couple of years, and the one thing I took from that experience was it just really increased my empathy. It really increased my empathy for folks, because when you see people at a mortuary, you're seeing them at the worst moment in their lives. There's not a worse moment they're ever going to have than the loss of a loved one, and everybody handles it differently. I've seen people come in and just be devastated. I've also seen people come in and use sort of gallows humor and joke their way through it. I've seen people really pull together, and I've seen people be driven apart. And so for me as a writer, the one thing it did, and that's why I set Darkest Prayer at a funeral home, because for me as a writer, I thought it created this incredible, like, sort of fascinating on the job writing school that I went to. Because I think if you can't take something from that experience and put it into your work, into your art, then maybe you shouldn't be doing your art, because it forced me to confront issues of mortality, issues of generational trauma, of toxicity, and it allowed me to sort of work through those things and watch other people work through those things. And so I was able to use that sort of experience to create what I hope is a very emotionally viable setting and story. When Nathan says I handle the bodies, he's talking about not just moving the bodies of the dead, but like you said, of the living, of the family members that come in, and the different ways they react. And sometimes he has to put his arm around them and hug them. And if you read the book, sometimes he has to disarm them and send them on their way. And you see all of that at a mortuary. And so not just that book, but in my subsequent books, that sort of lesson in empathy is something I've always will probably carry with me.
Wow, Sean, this is fascinating. I knew you had worked at a hardware store, but I didn't know you also worked at the mortuary, because I'm reminded of the opening scene in Razorblade Tears, where Buddy and Ike are at the funeral of their sons who were married, who they didn't approve of, couldn't find it in their hearts to be part of their lives. I'm going to reread that scene now with this knowledge of how this scene was informed by your own work, because we see Buddy and Ike struggling with what you're now sharing you've witnessed in real people, of gathering that compassion, that regret, that anger at self and others. Wow. That scene has always stayed with me, but now I'm realizing that all of your scenes are informed by this work. This is so fascinating. Becky saying she just finished My Darkest Prayers. She loved it. Becky, thanks for being with us today. And Sean, I want to get over to this other review from, two I want to get to. The Washington Post is saying this is a colorful tale of small town corruption. Your powerful storytelling skills shine through. Sean, have you always been a storyteller? Were you a little kid who was telling other little kids stories, or was this something you came to later in life?
No, I've always wanted to be a storyteller. I've always been that kid that, had really, really, really detailed imaginary friends. I've always wanted, I excelled at that, I think. I grew up in a family of storytellers. My uncles and aunts were and are very gregarious, extroverted folks. I like to say that they are backyard orators, and they are barbecue raconteurs. And so I grew up in an environment of language and story as not only a way to communicate how you're feeling, but a way to entertain. And so that's always been a part of me. Also, I will say this: the beginning of Razorblade Tears, the funeral director in Razorblade Tears at the beginning of the book, that's Walt. I just don't name him. That's just a little Easter egg. So, but
Wow, that's crazy, because Shay's asking, is there any Easter eggs connecting all three numbers? Shay, you're in vibe here with us. So tell us about this Easter
oh
egg.
yeah,
Tell us about
yeah. Oh yeah, so there's the Easter egg in Razorblade Tears that the funeral director who is directing the funeral for Isaiah and Derek, that's Walt. In Blacktop Wasteland, Skunk is mentioned by some bad guys who take offense to someone comparing them to Skunk, because they're like, we're not as bad as Skunk Mitchell. We're not that bad. And so in my next book, All the Sinners Bleed, there's a scene where a body is found, and uh, uh, there's Nathan is called to remove the body. I don't name him, but everything in that scene tells you it's Nathan. He even cracks a joke that the main character in that book doesn't think is funny. So I love the idea of this shared universe, that they're all connected. And in the book I'm going to be working on after All the Sinners Bleed, I think the character of Shade is going to make an appearance. So I just love the books being all connected in sort of this sort of S.A. Cosby shared universe in southeastern Virginia. So
there's something I think we as readers, Shay, I mean, right, we love the idea of these Easter eggs, of getting to read those and feeling extra cool and connected. So that is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Shay, thank you for the great question. Sean, thanks for the Easter egg hunt. We have another comment here. A mystery user saying, I just finished RAZORBLADE TEARS and I love the complexity of the characters and their hard-earned growth. I can't wait to read your other works. So let's talk about these complex characters. So how do you create them? So Buddy and Ike both have done hard time, both have been through it, both have not been the best husbands, certainly not the best fathers. Do they come to you fully formed, Sean, as one of your very complex imaginary friends when you're growing up? Or do you think, oh, I need to paint another level. I need to paint another level. Like, does it deepen as you go, or how's that work?
That's a good question. I think they do come to me pretty fully formed. Like when I start telling the story to myself, which is how I start every book, I get a good idea of these characters. For me, I like to create the characters even before I write anything. Like I just kind of get a sense of who they are and what they're about. And also, a lot of times the characters I write about, I want their specific life to intersect with this moment in the book. And what I mean by that is everything that's happened to like Nathan up to the point you open the first page of Darkest Prayer has prepared him for the story that we're about to read. You know, the fact that he's a former Marine, so he can physically handle himself. He's a former deputy, so he knows how to investigate crimes. He works at a funeral home, so he's not scared of dead bodies. All the things that he's been through, his life as a mixed race person in Virginia, sort of not feeling comfortable in either the black or white world, sort of having to find his own niche. All of that has prepared him to deal with this story, to deal with this event that's happening in his life. I always think of books as a snapshot of a character's life. There's stuff that happened before the book started, and there's stuff that's going to happen after the book ends. And so everything that they've been through up to that point, it prepares them for what we're about to go through with them. Same thing with Ike and Buddy Lee. Same thing with Bug. Same thing with Titus Crown, who's the character in my next book. He's a sheriff in a small town. And everything that he's been through has prepared him for this moment. So I'm a big believer in fate and destiny. Not so much in a religious sense, but in sort of a way that we navigate the rhythm of the universe. You know, speaking of Dennis Lehane, he said something to me at BoucherCon. He said, you know, when you write a book, that's the story that only you can tell. No one else can tell that story that you want to tell. And I think for me, when I think of my characters, I feel like no one else can survive, or no one else is able to take on the story that I want to tell except this specific character at this specific moment in their life. So
I love that. Now, let's talk a little bit more. When they come to you and you say you spend some time getting to know them, how do you get to know them? Do you journal about them? Do you write about what they would? Some authors have come on here and said, you know, they think about what the person would eat for breakfast, even if that doesn't go in the book, what they'd wear, what their greatest regret is. You know, sometimes they try to have a conversation. What's that process look for you, Sean?
that's all a part of it. A lot of times what I'll do, this sounds weird, but I like to go on Pinterest and I like to type in different aspects of their life. And so I like, if I'm talking about like Nathan, you know, I type in, you know, southern aesthetics, you know, and I kind of look at what comes up in Pinterest. I'm a very visual person. So when you type in southern aesthetics, you might come up with a water hole, or there might be a church, or there might be a picture of a copse of trees, or a grove of blackberry bushes or something like that. And what I'll do is I'll write stories in my head. Sometimes I'll write them down about the character's childhood, about, you know, their first kiss, the first time they lost a fight, when they, you know, what they like to do in the summertime when they're out of school, all of that. And it's different for each character, you know, it's different for every character. But that's sort of the way I get to know them. And then what I'll do is sometimes I'll write like a short 2 or 3 page biography that sort of tells me their life up to the moment that I start the book. So with Nate, he was a Marine for 8 years. He came home, joined the sheriff's department because he wanted to keep people safe. He felt like his time as a Marine, he didn't keep people safe. He loved being a
Mm.
Marine, but he didn't feel like he was able to protect people the way he should have. And so he became a sheriff's deputy. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to protect the people that mean the most to him, his father and his mother. And so once he did that happened, he didn't want to be a sheriff's deputy anymore. And he didn't know what he wanted to do. He was lost. And luckily he had a cousin, a friend who gave him a job, gave him a place to stay. Cause he lost everything when his parents died. He lost their house. He barely had enough to pay for the funeral. His whole romantic life story before that. He's someone who has a hard time being monogamous. He's not good in relationships. And so he's aware of that about himself. And so when you see him in the book, he often mentions in the book that he's been intimate or promiscuous with this person or promiscuous with that person, but he's not bragging about it. Again, it's him realizing this is a character flaw that I should do
Mm.
something about. But also, he's like a lot of us. He doesn't have the strength yet to do it. I hope by the end of Darkest Prayer, if I ever get a chance to revisit him and Skunk, that we'll see a lot more growth in Nathan from that experience. Falling in love with Lisa, who's a character in the book, and then losing that, I think, has changed him. So if I ever get a chance to read or write some more about those guys, I definitely think you'll see some changes in him. But that's a part of that growth of those characters. That's a part of understanding those characters. And like I said, that all comes to me fully formed. I've already got all that in my head once I come up with a character.
Where do the ideas usually come to you fully formed? Are you sleeping? Are you walking, driving, showering, thinking about another book, watching TV? Where are you? Do you carry a notebook? When do the moments of divine inspiration settle on you, Sean?
I used to carry a notebook. Now I just have like an open Google Doc on my phone and I'll jot stuff down. But yeah, sometimes it comes to me like with Nathan. For instance, with Nathan, I was talking to a friend of mine who's an ex sheriff's deputy here in my hometown, and he was talking about how he stopped being a deputy because he didn't feel like he was accomplishing the goal he set out to do, which was to keep people safe. And I took some of his philosophy about that, how he felt that his position as a deputy in his particular situation, he just didn't feel like he was accomplishing anything. He didn't feel like he was doing anything. And Nathan has a line in Darkest Prayer where he says, safety is an illusion. There's no such thing as safety. There's just a downtime between tragedies. And sort of that's sort of my
Ooh.
interpretation of what my friend was talking about. And that's where Nathan came from, with this idea of a man who really, more than anything else, he wanted to keep people safe. He's failed at that. And so his part-time job as this sort of unlicensed private eye troubleshooter, it's about making money on the side. Yeah, I mean, let's not delve into the realm of fantasy, but it's also about his penance that he's putting on himself
Mm.
because he wasn't able to protect his mom and dad. And so since he wasn't able to protect them, he wants to protect other people. He's trying to redeem himself. I think redemption is a theme that runs through my work as well. So
Yeah, I think we see that penance and redemption, and the thirst, the desire for for redemption, the desire to make whole, to do better in all of your books. The LA Times, let's pop that one up, saying Cosby is testing the ways that racism, misogyny, and homophobia have distorted men's views on themselves and asking how they can be made whole. So again, seeking that redemption. Oh, Sean, what a pleasure to chat with you and to have this heart-filling, mind-opening, soul-nourishing conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Y'all, the book is out now. It is just 6 days old. Here is the link one more time. Oh, we have another question coming in from Marjorie. She says, Sean, I find you so open about your life and work, like at the Minneapolis BoucherCon. Have you ever regretted sharing something in public?
I don't think I regretted sharing anything. I think I think it's funny that you sometimes share. I think it's funny you sometimes share something about yourself, and I think people think that is the only thing about you, or that is the most important thing that you've shared, and it's just a facet of your personality. Like I was talking on an interview, and I said that I like whiskey. I'm a fan of whiskey. I like whiskey. Not just when when you're young, when you're 16 or 17, alcohol is just to get drunk. It's like, what's the quickest bang for my buck? You become an adult. Hopefully, I have become a connoisseur of whiskey, of the different notes and taste and techniques of creating it. That being said, I get a lot of whiskey bottles as gifts. Because I think people heard me say it and they're like, "Oh man, if I drank as much whiskey as people think I do, I wouldn't be able to write." So that I don't think I regret saying that. I just think it's kind of funny that people zeroed in on that. So that's a great question.
I don't know, Sean. Maybe you'd be like Hemingway. Maybe you'd just be writing even more. Maybe you'd just be, writing. Writing. I mean, they might be bad pages, but there might be 400 pages a day. We don't we don't know. Julie saying thank you so much for this great chat. Joan saying thank you both so much. I can't read it. I can't wait to read it. I have loved your other novels, Sean. Joan, thank you so much for the comment and for the conversation. For joining us for this conversation. Y'all, here is the link one more time. It is just out 6 days now, y'all. It's just barely out. So get your hands on this book. Again, NPR saying Sean Cosby may just be a miracle worker, and we couldn't agree more. Sean, we can't wait to have you back when All the Sinners Bleed comes out. So please do come back and join us. And congratulations again. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining me. I'll be back at the top of the hour with Professor Piper Hughley and the story of Anne Lowe. Have a good night.